Hello, this is my brother Joey. Now you have it all straight. No excuses. A lot of you are wondering which one was I talking to, but I wanted to thank my brother for helping me get that wall here and for manning it. Most of your conversations in front of it have been with him, not with me. He's also the reason it's still standing, because he's a carpenter and I program computers. And thus we're used to bugs, but when you get them in the real world, they're not so good. So I thought that this year, let's talk about 5,000 first impressions. I always talk about futurism, and I will be talking about futurism more tomorrow. It's not a plug if you tell people to go to your own session. So come again tomorrow. This time I thought I've always showed these little bites of these interactive installations that I do, but I never explain how they came to be, why, and in doing all of this stuff and bringing them to events like this, I've actually made a ton of mistakes, which means I've learned a lot. So I thought, hey, why don't I share that with some people, maybe to prevent some of their mistakes, maybe give some inspiration in the rest. So this is a behind-the-scenes look at this kind of stuff. But this is my day job. I'm a product designer. This is actually from the website. I look so formal. And as a product designer, I work on imaginary things. This was for a company that was trying to rethink electricity. What if it was IP directed? So on the right, you have a light switch that is hot swappable. So the gang is the part of the wall where you put your light switch into. So you may imagine the gang like it was hot swappable USB, in which case the switch could become a gadget. So all these have switches on them, but they also are other things, like one's a router. We had to put both the Cisco router and the Airport Express in there just for fun. Maybe it's a 3D camera and an array microphone to be like one of those like intersections of room-size computing, or just a music control system. You could just move them from room to room. They had a plentiful power supply. You can move to a new house. We thought that'd be really cool. And this is parasitically powered emergency light. So it's an air conditioning vent. Up there are like mylar strips that flapping in the breeze and generating static electricity, charging a battery. So when the power goes out, you have light. I also work on actual things. These are all products I've worked on the teams for designing. They all have very interesting user interfaces. So that's my professional world. But we're going to talk more about things I do in my spare time here, which is I play with fire. This is my geeky concert lighter. And if we were listening to it right now, it would be playing the sweet tones of Sweet Child of Mine. There's a little microphone on one end, and you are seeing the waveforms of Sweet Child of Mine in fire, which is way better than holding up your lighter at a concert. Although I have to say, this one does get a bigger reaction out of security. I like to play with interaction. I brought this to FITC before and embarrassed people with it. It's a supermodel scale. It shows you your weight using the relative weights of supermodels. So you sit down, and supermodels weigh between 90 and 110 pounds, and humans weigh between 90 and, 900 pounds. So there's a relationship. It weighs you, and then it flips over to the supermodel that represents your weight. So rather than numbers making you feel really bad about yourself, supermodels that make me feel really great about yourself. It's a scale you actually want to get on. Sometimes I play with both, which is hard, because we've been taught since a young age, do not interact with fire. But if you get a Connect and you make it into a fireman, which is a combination of a Rubens tube and a theremin, this one's going woo, woo, woo. You can dance around in front of it and control the fire. And what's really cool is it supports up to 10 people. So if you get 2 people together, they can create a constructive and a destructive wave, which is really hard to do with the Rubens tube. And instead of a sine curve, it produces this little humpback camel thing. It's really cool. I take things apart. These are some speakers. They used to be speakers. Drivers pulled out of them, and then I try to put them back together in the wrong order. This is generally something I do a lot, and that's the Auto Vortex cannon array. So little solo cups and those speakers, and it makes little smoke rings, and it sounds a little like a casino as it's going off. It's also something I brought here before, and we had to, it's where I learned my first time what it takes to turn off a fire alarm in a building of this size. At least least we thought of it beforehand rather than evacuating the entire universe. Well, like as if the Hilton is the entire universe. But it is right now. Okay, when there it charges a lot to do laundry. Okay, I'm also a maker. I have the tools of making. I have learned to do making. It's very helpful in product design. It's also very helpful if you want to build anything. And this is an exciting universe that's getting better and better. These are actually the PCBs that are out at the light wall being cut on my other mill. But a long time ago, I invested in an ultra-short throw projector and a bunch of fidgets. And fidgets are like Arduino. They allow you to bring sensing right into a computer with a USB bus. But I didn't have a screen. And so I didn't let that stop me. I just thought, you know what, I'll project on a lot of things that are not screens, right? I also learned just enough code to make things work. You don't have to be an expert in anything more than learning these days. And that's what you should specialize with. I put on my badge here, the first one is student, because that's what I always do. You learn enough to make stuff work, then you can have a purpose drive your life, and you can learn just to fulfill that purpose, and this is how you can be a lot more passionate without being subjected to the tyranny of your own skill set. So just enough code to work. This is like open frameworks. And it's reading an FFT, and it has a little, socket server that Flash hooks up to. Notice what a mess this is. Anyone who's a real software engineer at this point is rolling their eyes, going like the number of dependencies here. But it worked, and it got me invited to parties. Oh, I think it actually, if I back up here, I can actually get it to explain itself more what it's doing. That's what it's doing. Sound visualization is what it's doing. Okay, so this got me invited to parties. We all like parties. I like parties, but I didn't like partying as much as I like bringing things to parties and setting them up. It's like, my world of party was a lot more logistical. Right, and it would be stuff like this, right? Set up a Rubens tube. There's that same code that we just showed working, now registered to a brick wall, and it was really cool. And I discovered that I really, really liked events, and I discovered other things about events, that people at parties are really open and a lot more accepting to new experiences, and they're also a lot more willing to give you feedback about those experiences. And 90% of that is due to alcohol. That fire is so cool. I just want to touch it. No, don't touch it. Please don't touch it. But it's like the music, it's dancing. Okay, so this is what I secretly discovered. I'm actually a wedding event planner. Like secretly, deep down is what I've always wanted to be. This is a true statistic. I have actually been to 54 weddings. And a lot of them were people that I actually knew, even. And you can reach out a little if you're going to go to that many weddings. I actually did write the vows for 3. My own would make it 4th. And I was the best man at, I think, also 4 of them. And one of them I did not show up as the best man. Somewhere halfway through, I became the best man. Fun weddings. You can ask me about them later. And if anyone's seen this movie, by the way, and I know you all have, so you know exactly what's wrong with it. Should have been Jennifer Aniston, and Matthew McConaughey should have been the wedding coordinator. It would have fixed the whole thing, right? Am I right? Anyways, so of course, as soon as Frog, which was the company I worked for 14 years, says, we're going to throw a big party. I'm like, me, I want to throw this big party. Party. And at first, I just had to be a participant on the committee, but I always would eke out my own space. It would be different from the rest of the party. More on that later. Eventually, I worked up to the point where I directed the party. I would take 3 months of the year to fulfill the whole thing. And I've continued that since leaving Frog through MakerFaire and other things. So let's and as much as I thought it'd be glamorous, and it would, help me meet Jennifer Aniston, and then, I'm being too honest right now. This is what directing actually looks like. This is what directing event really looks like. I really admire Sean because he's gotten past this point to where he can really, but this is, you're often down on your knees troubleshooting something as the guests are arriving and trying to make it work. It's not a glamorous business. It's a very hard-working business, and that hard work and the rush you get from succeeding it is why I like it. So let's give a little quick history. What is this crazy party that I'm going to use as a shell to talk about mistakes and advice? It was the South by Southwest Interactive opening party, and it's held every year around March, and it's for gold badge holders. And only. So you have this really conscripted audience, which is great. They've paid to be there, so they're probably going to have a good time. And also the whole conference has to do with technology, which means you can do things. The last important thing to consider was only 3 hours long, not 3 days, right? And it all started in our office, so I didn't have to learn everything at once, which was handy. And it was a long time ago, turn of the last century. In the 90s. And then it turned into the 2000s, and we would just get people together, and we would have alcohol. Everyone's been to a lot of these parties in their life as they get into corporate America or even the company or even just hang out with friends. We had a lot. We would get performers, and we would get musicians, and we would just all have a good time. And then it... Such a good time that at least twice it ended with the fire department showing up, which will be an extension of my first lessons. It's very important to know how to turn off the smoke alarm in a building. Or it's possible that your party will end with the fire department showing up. Now, Frog was located in a building that in Austin, Texas, was considered a high-rise. It was also located in a building where the first floor was occupied by a bank. So when the fire alarm went off, it kicked in a whole bunch of procedures that aren't even in place for normal buildings. So the entire SWAT team... Right, because you've seen Ocean 11, when the alarm goes off, someone's getting into that vault, right? But also the entire fire department and a special division of the fire department, which is known for high-rise fires, because most police chiefs grew up in the 70s and watched Disco Inferno and all of that stuff. Or they lived through, fire is a serious issue, but... So if a creative director at your company who is now a partner of yours in another company who I won't name, but you could go and find at the website, set off too much smoke machine and you haven't turned off the smoke, all those people are going to show up, 5 ladder trucks, the SWAT team, and the poor guys are required to go up the stairs in smoke inhalation gear and clear the entire building by hand. They have to open every door and get everyone out. It's very, very costly. So that's why it's important to know about the smoke alarms, okay? First rule. First big learning. That's a very important one. You guys will use it all the time. From there, we moved to bigger spaces. We're like, you know what? Let's stop having this in our office because it probably could lead to jail time. The fire marshal. But you can see we were doing the same things. It's still a band. There's still performers. And everyone's just having a good time, right? But there was a problem as we scaled up, okay? Heterogeneity was working against us, okay? So I did this in Minneapolis. They thought that was a joke because the slide's all white people. I just never saw it. I always saw them different. I always saw them as all different people, and that was the problem, right? It's the opposite of homogeneity. So, here's the way to describe it. If you're going to get a band for more than 1,000 people who aren't buying tickets to go see that band, They all have different tastes in music. Therefore, you can never get a band that will satisfy the entire crowd. The larger the crowd gets, the less satisfied the audience would be. So there's a breakover point somewhere around 750 people where music is required to be a background event, right? Or it has to be so in the middle of the bell curve to please people, right? And we crossed over that line, and we discovered that the bands were not working anymore. People were just ignoring the band. You were paying a lot of money to set up a band, and therefore we're like, we have to do something different. And then we set up this. It's just a simple shadow tracking installation. There's a lot of these out here, and little virtual butterflies land on your hand, and people went nuts for it. And then we realized, oh, okay, this is going to solve our heterogeneity problem. And then this happened. And so we started incorporating more interactive stuff in. And then we had this party at the Mexican American Cultural Center where we were up to about 1,500 people. And we entered this strange psychology of geeks. Do you see up at the top there? Those are not people enjoying the view. Those are all people waiting in line for the bar. What's funny to me, and when I sat back that night and learned, I wasn't yet the director of this party, but the very next year I was. I stood back and watched this happen. There are 7 bars at this party, and there are 14 bartenders, and 6 of them are downstairs. Yet 3/4 of the party is waiting in line for 2 bartenders upstairs. How does that happen? It's because there's a social facilitation that happens in crowds and lines. A rumor spreads that the bar upstairs is really fast and slow, and everyone goes upstairs and gets in line to wait for that bar. Now, they're geeks, so once they progress to get into a line, it takes a whole lot of effort to get them out of the line. You can literally go up and tell them, like, you know, you should get out of line. There's that bar down there, and they won't get out of line. There's just such a social currency spent on it. So I realized we really have to start taking into account the psychology of crowds. Another instance of this is we had porta potties set up one year, and I'm going through the party, and all of a sudden I run into this line. I'm like, oh no, not again. It's almost a 1/4 mile long. It's like this line is going across the entire acre we have for our party. And I follow it, and I'm like, oh, that's the end of the line, go the other way. And I followed it. I was expecting to find the bar again, but I found the porta potties. All right? And we had 20 of them, and geeks are polite. The entire crowd was waiting in a single file line to use the porta potties. And once again, we were like, oh, you got to get out of line. You know, so I went to ACL the next year and realized that you need to put out 2 pieces of bike rail to cause people to automatically line up in a parallel queue. Bike rail is like these kind of metal stanchions. You'll see them all the time at events. And now you know, if you put one every 3 porta potties, it's a social queue that you're allowed to line up in a parallel queue. It took us 30 minutes to break that line down into like 20 lines. So I literally had to grab people by the arm and like, come up here, come up here, come up here. And I'm like, no, but I'm cutting. I'm like, you're not cutting, go. I'm like, don't you see everyone over here can't get to the bar, and they have that thirsty look in their eyes. And they're just going to break through. Red Rover. Anyways. This killed us on Twitter. This was lesson number 1, was pay attention to social facilitation and learn a little bit about the psychology of crowds. But number 2, it killed us on Twitter. There is such a thing as bad PR now, okay? There used to be no such thing as bad PR. It went like this. Everyone hated Mr. Whipple, the Charmin guy. Don't squeeze the Charmin. They all hated him in testing, but when they went to the grocery store, they kind of forgot about him, but they remembered the Charmin part. The forgetting was part of this adage that there is no such thing as bad PR. Well, the internet doesn't forget. Those tweets are still out there. You can search Frog Party and still find blog articles and press that says the frog party sucks. I waited in line, and 7 years later, and when you're choosing what party to go to, you choose the one with the really long bar lines. Yeah, no, you don't. So there is now such a thing as bad PR, and we realize we actually need to change our game. And so we just changed our game completely. And first we said, why are we having a party? Why should we have a big event? And the answer was, well, because sometimes we work on very serious stuff. This is something we did at Argo. It's an ambulance drone, autonomous. It would be less expensive than a life flight helicopter. You wouldn't have to put first responders at risk. It could get in a lot of really great locations. I put it up here because we have several medical products we're working right now, and I just can't show them. So I thought this would be topical. And that's serious stuff as a designer you work on every day. So every now and then you just got to release that energy. Also, we study the digital lifestyle, so, practice what you preach. We need a laboratory, and where can you get a laboratory? Remember what I said earlier about drunk people? It's a great laboratory. So we're like, let's turn this party into a social experiment. That's legal. We never went full Stanford prison experiment, but we did go experiment. And then there's the bleeding edge, right? Where do you test new technology against people who are in a receptive mode? And, so if you want to have playful research and development, watch a digital app and see the edge bleed, and then think by making. So to learn and practice the making skills, which then further your career in the digital practice of product design, since everything is becoming physical and digital. That was what we thought. Make this the underpinning and purpose of this event, so we can get more out of it than just socialization. And then, of course, the press ain't bad either when you get it, and you can work hard and get it better, right? What makes a good party? This is my opinion that one, you need it's an equation. Everything in my life reduces equations. I'm just so math-oriented. Lower inhibitions. Typically, it's done with alcohol. It's not the only equation for that, by the way. You need a source of energy. Typically, this is lighting and music as the energy. And if you do really good with those two things, you get synergy. Synergy is energy returned. It becomes a feedback loop. Everyone leaves with a great sense of goodwill, like I had a really good time, right? And lower inhibitions, though, requires two things, okay? And this is a good proxy to lower inhibitions instead of alcohol. It requires critical mass. When you don't have critical mass, people tend to atomically lump up with people they know. It leaves space in the room, and energy does not collect and magnify, right? So you can see it here at the beginning of this party. All the nerds are just talking to nerds. But once it fills up, people turn and start facing each other. They bump into each other. They invade each other's personal space. And if they're at an event that's been set up to be like, it's cool to be in each other's space, that instantly leads to like a hello or a conversation, or no, I'm sorry, and leads to a conversation, right? So actually, critical mass is very important. In the first years of a party, before I was directing it, we would put the fence line at the edge. It's because the place said, well, you've rented this place, you have this, this, and this. So we put the fence there. And the first year I directed, I was like, we're pulling that fence in. I want the number of guests estimated here to have approximately 3 square feet of space each, because once they get that close together, they begin to communicate with each other. And so you got to build a critical mass. Now, it's a sensitive thing. We were using moving gates so I could push them out farther if I got it horribly wrong, which I did one year, and it was a disaster, but I'll tell you that. And then we had discovered what I told you earlier, that interaction is a universal form of energy, meaning it appeals to everyone, a diverse crowd, and you don't have to worry about tastes as much. So we decided, let's employ this very with a lot of profundity. So what makes a good installation? Since this is what you'll be using to get the energy at your party, then the goodwill. Well, I think it needs to have a kind of a thoughtful provocation. I always start with that place, right? You want to get people thinking so you can get people talking, and also so you can get back to your message, right? This is, I think, in the design world, we talk about authenticity a lot. It should be approachable, right? If it's a spring party, having like a haunted house guy with a chainsaw ain't going to work. If it requires trigonometry to do, it's not approachable. And it needs to be achievable. Interaction is not like a band. The band rehearses a ton, and then they show up your event play. You have to rehearse too, which means you can't start with something you have no idea how to construct. Otherwise, go hire someone to do it. And relatable. It should meet your audience, what they're into, and not what you're into. So you can drive them a little bit and get them talking about it. And lastly, it really should be delightful. This is my smart light. We actually deployed them in Shanghai. We had 18 of them, and we put that in a paper globe. And there's those little buttons on the left. And we hung them on people's badges, and they blast an IR code, which means they're directional. So the lights would light up based on how many people were facing them. And we put them in key social areas of the room. And you could just look at which one was like bright red and know that was where the most people were facing each other and having a conversation. So all that packed together, we said, that's now the South by Southwest Interactive opening party. It's no longer going to be dancers and fire performers and bands. It's going to be a large-scale social experience using interactive installations. And it was a lot of work. At its culmination, this is what it turned into. 7,000 people, 160 feet of linear feet of bar. You want a bartender every 3 feet, by the way. And you want a foot of bar for about approximately every 10 people at your party if you're going to be giving out 2 drinks an hour. Just write that down. Dozens of installations. That's how you never have a line again, by the way. I worked it out to a formula. And then they would come every year. South by would come and like, I think we're going to have 5,000 people. And I said, well, then I think you're going to give us 15 bartenders. We worked on it for 6 months. We never liked working on it more than that because it was hard to hit subject matter that was relevant and relatable to people. It would get stale. It took 2 days to set up the whole thing. Whole thing happened in 3 hours. And then we have about 5 hours to take it down. How did we choose the interactions? There's 2 main strategies out there that we always use. There's probably a few others as well, but these are the 2 ones I always thought for an event. You can do lots of little things that engage everyone or a few big things that lots of people can watch. But you definitely want to engage that. The lots of little things has to be really approachable. The big things only have to be relatable because 10% of your audience really only ever cares about interacting with it. And a lot of people are very comfortable just being a watcher and they feel like they've had the experience by proxy. Yeah, or voyeurism. They're all a bunch of peeping Toms. Okay, so down and out South by, this was one where we employed the first strategy, lots of little things to everyone. We had read Cory Doctorow's Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, which I suggest you read as well, along with his other books, all of them, every single one of them. If you're like in our industry, you should read them all. But in that book, he had this notion of woofy, which was a currency based on social respect. And we're like, how can we recreate that in a party form? And we needed some form of ubiquitous anonymity. And so we went and bought 3,000 RFID tags, and we put them on little cards that had instructions and handed them out to everyone. We bought a bunch of readers. We needed, in the book, he had heads-up display, and we decided let's do an above-the-head display because heads-up displays were really, really expensive. And this was before Google Glass, and we already knew people would look dumb wearing them. And so we did this instead. We had this beautiful building, and we wanted an augmented reality bar, and we made one. What it did was you had to scan your tag for a drink, and then there were these lanes set up, and a little animation would come down, and then it would display to everyone how many drinks you had taken. And so we would say the drinks are free, they just might cost you your pride. And that was the bartender. Because we gave them one and said, scan one, make it look like it's working, and then everyone took over shortly later. It's really fun. And then we counted up the total drinks. We made connect stations where 2 people could scan either side. They were then connected, like as if there was an app that could friend them or something a long time ago. Some people didn't need tags to connect at all. Just make up their own game. We had signage so people could like all the experiences, and we had augmented reality porta potties first year. You guys have seen these before, right? I drug one up here 2 years ago. For those of you who haven't, this is what they are. best use of augmented reality ever. Notice the clock. We do know what you're doing in there. We do. I had this photo stage that took these photos that people would like goof around in and then turn them into like a cool little collage, and they didn't realize that we were just also putting them up on the wall as a billboard for everyone to see. They're facing the other direction. So it took a lot of people little time to put it together. Like, wait a second, I shouldn't have been doing that. And we had these identify stations where you could go up and scan your badge, and then it would list your stats on the wall, would draw all the connections of everyone that you were connected to, and it was just really, really fun, right? One thing we learned that year was really fun, and we wanted to do more of that stuff in the future, but we found that little things do not scale for everyone very well. The money just starts piling up, and the labor starts piling up. It was really great. It was really great at that size for us, but so if you ever endeavor on an idea like that, just do your budget real carefully. It can get out of control. So then the next year, we're like, well, let's do big things for a lot of people. And we did this playing with time of light. Time of light was a reference to 3D cameras, which were just super hot by then, right? And we built a life-size step sequencer. It was crowd-sized, 64 by 64 platforms. People stood on them, and when they stood on them, they became basically a signal that the tone would play at that point. It sounded like casino music. It was an instrument the whole crowd had to play, and it sounded awful. Crowds are awful musicians. It took a lot of work to put this together, and we ended up basically hand wiring it into place. Then the next year we did one called Play, where we said, let's merge analog and digital experiences together. And so we're going to do a life-size game of Connect 4 where people played a somewhat intelligent computer, see who would win, mankind or machines. We repurposed it what we had, and we set it up, and we had a very interesting result, which is that the machine plays at the level of an 8th grader, and any person on their own can beat this thing pretty easily unless you are really bad at Connect 4. Really bad. But a crowd lost 8 out of 10 times. It's because we would release them one at a time, and the first person would go out, and then the next person would go out, and they would have, eventually, it takes a while to beat the game. Each person is making a choice, and each person has 2 social facilitations, and eventually the first person who's playing is begging the next person to get on to throw the game because they need to pee really badly, or a drink or whatever, right? So the humans turn on each other and the machine ends up winning. We made some light tricycles, which is a game of Tron that I brought up here one year, and people could actually sit there and ride. Light cycles would have gotten into a lot of like trouble with Disney, so we made them light tricycles, which is not the same thing at all, right? And so they sit here and race each other in a game of Tron. I mean, light tricycle. And this is a life-size electromechanical game of Pong. It is 30 feet by 60 feet. There's 2 sides of it. One side here is playing a side on the other end of the party. It's going really slow, and that's because we worked out game speed would be 35 miles an hour. And then in user testing, we discovered that no one would stand in front of a 300-pound gantry when it was moving 35 miles an hour. Just goes to show user testing can ruin a really good installation. So the score is 0-0, of course. Right. Then the next year we did the other singularity, which I've spoken about a lot, and there's a video here where I'll speak about it real quickly so I could rest. We're quickly entering an age where powerful technology is becoming really affordable. There's going to be more technology available to do more mundane, possibly prurient things. And that's what our party is an examination of. We call it the other singularity. With very little money, actually, we were able to get our hands on 2,500 RGB LEDs. People would go up and they can actually paint whatever colors they want onto this wall. In a way, it's like a big light bright. But really what it states is, I think 2 years from now, when it's half as much and half the size, you could have one paint color one day, one paint color another day. It can start relaying information. If you're watching a scary movie, it can be scary wallpaper. We're building a 30 by 30 foot Zen garden, and rather than a person raking it in a meditative fashion, a robot rakes it. We have this cute little robot that drives around and rakes in the sand for you. Is that even appropriate place for technology? Would it help or would it really hurt the experience? Isn't the whole point to be raking the garden yourself? Or maybe it's better. Maybe it allows for more focus on meditation and less stress about the patterns. It's an experience we call light as ink. There's nothing printed on the pages of these books. We project the imagery onto the books. So you turn the page, you're seeing each page. This is a real device done digitally, skew realism. But what's really fascinating to me about it is when we costed it all out, it was just a little bit more right now, today, than it would have been if we'd actually printed out these books. By just next year or a couple of years, it's going to be more expensive to print a book like this and to actually be able to use light as ink. So then we did a crowdsourced DJ, which isn't here, so I'll skip that so I can get on to some of the other stuff, which is the nuts and bolts of how the party ran. The basics, you need a site visit, get in writing, startup fees, the fire marshal is your god. He can shut you down more ways than you can think of, so whatever he says goes. More of that smoke alarm stuff. That's all the basics. You can find a lot of books on Amazon that would teach you this part. The process-wise, in terms of structure, there's a lot of ways to do this, and teamwork is very, very important to any event, but also kind of runs as a benevolent dictatorship, yielding a lot of power over a somewhat feudal workforce. And that's because things have to happen right away, and so there always has to be a good chain of command and a decision maker that really just has to say how it is. Otherwise, paralysis by analysis sets in. And one thing about an event is it's the one deadline that doesn't move. People are going to show up, they're going to be there, they're going to be drinking. If you're not ready, it's just going to pass you by, and you've done all that prep work for nothing. We would build a concept deck. Very important to have a storyboard. Here's that interactive life-size step sequencer. Very rudimentary storyboard. If you're doing too much storyboarding, I think you have a lot of time. Usually we didn't. I like at the top where it says, "Go, we are doing this. It is hardware heavy, software light. It will be impressive." And it was for about 5 minutes. Here's the crowd-sized POG sketch. We leveled up our game. Picking concepts. We had a rule, no AI quadcopters. It is a rule that stands for it has to be possible. We'd have these committee sessions. People were like, let's do quadcopters, and then they could dance like this and go around, and we'd be like, yeah, let's do that. Does anyone know a PhD and a specialist in dancing quadcopters? You have to actually bring things back to their very base experience. Unless you are an expert in AI quadcopters, you're not going to get them. Keep your idea simple because you're going to get 5,000 first impressions. At an event, people can give you approximately 10 seconds of their time, make the most of it. If they can't figure it out in that long, then you need to have a host there guiding them through it, which means you're not going to get as much throughput, and not as many people are going to have the experience. You'll notice the light wall, the light book are here. You walk up, you use them, you get the idea, you go back to drinking, which is the way most people do it. It was really cool. Everything functions off the map. We laid everything out, so we have a sense of geography. Parties do, helps you get your flow and all of that. Then the day of the party, you crumple up the map and throw it away. Because everything's going to change that day, and if you keep following the map at that point, you're going to just screw yourself over because weather is coming, rain or whatever. There's a spreadsheet. Start costing early, cost often, trace everything. I think in our early years, we fell down here a lot, and then you do the paperwork afterwards, and it's really bad. As I directed the party, we were never over budget one single year because we always projected. It's so easy with the internet to cost project. Building the concepts themselves, cost out staging. Originally, we didn't, and we did all the staging in our break room, and the whole company was pissed off at us for taking over because you had to eat lunch with that guy looking at you, and it's creepy. It's creepy, and they're like, how long is this going to be set up? 3 months? Really? We just said we were throwing a party. No, we're throwing the other singularity. So later, we costed in staging, and we rented a warehouse. You need big open spaces to do things like life-size electromechanical games of Pong. And you end up with extra insurance and all that kind of stuff, so make sure you can pay the electric bill. Pale the core of the concept first, embellish later. You got to treat this like a video game where you storm the beach. If you run right for the objective and you get mowed down by the virtual machine guns, you need to get into a foxhole early. So get a working version of it first, and then start raising the fidelity, because that timeline is just going to come rushing at you, right? Embellish later. So these guys wanted the Tron bikes. Originally, they wanted them to look just like the bikes in the game, and they built this whole crazy mold. It was a lot of work. It was awesome. And it looked really good, and I did a time check on them, and they're like, pulled it out. I was like, guys, what day is it? And they're like, this. What day did you start? This. I was like, that means you're going to finish the fourth one about 3.5 weeks after the party. And they were really disappointed. They're like, so they built the frame, and they got the lights on, because that's what was needed to make it work. And they're like, we really just don't like the way it looks. And I was like, well, it is going to be a party at night. So our first working thing, and then we figured out the software, and sometimes that's just what you go with, but we had something working. People had a blast. The video went out. We got 300,000 views on Channel 9. Totally worked. Would have been better with the fiberglass shells, no doubt, but if we'd spent all the time making them, we would have had nothing at the event. Start with what you have. Every year we looked at what do we have around, because it's the cheapest way to get going. Think about setup first. I didn't think about it the first year of the white wall. I thought about it a little bit. I ended up hiring 12 guys and 2 trucks to carry it from the staging space to this. It cost me about $2,000 more than I should have spent. So also, if you don't think about setup first, you might end up on your knees for 48 hours hand wiring a step sequencer, which is where this picture comes from. Start with the crate. We did the light wall at MakerFaire. We built the crate and then found out that if you're 2 inches over 48 inches, you turn into a new pricing category for less than a load freight. We spent $600 more than we had to shipping it. So this year, look at the crates. They fit on a skid perfectly. So I always say, if you're going to travel somewhere with it, start with the crate. Give the appearance of working. Everything needs to have its broken cycle. No one really knows what your interactive installation is going to be, actually. And therefore, just make sure it fails in a mode that makes it look like it's working. Earlier in that presentation, I showed you the bartenders were scanning, right? Makes it look like it's working even if people are not participating. In this case, we had a fail mode of fake statistics for the crowdsourced DJ that it would drop into when our Wi-Fi connection went down. Use the human computer. There were a lot of ideas on how we should use the cloud to hook up these actual DJ units with the polling units. And then we could use that to select and play the song. And I said, why don't we just have a person look at a website, put in the song, and hit play? And that's what he is doing right there. And they're like, oh, that's going to be a lot cheaper. I was like, and it's going to work better, because the Wi-Fi going down and all that. So use the human computer. The Wizard of Oz had it right. Rules of the party. Stay on radio. Oh, I get so angry when people went off radio, because that's the point. The whole point of having radios is to talk to each other instantly. Pace yourself. It's going to be a long day. Bring a towel, power bar in your pocket, and this is not your party. People see this different ways, but I've always seen it. If your guests are drinking, you probably should not be. It's their party, not your party. You make very poor decisions when you join them in the festivities. Be press ready, because you never know when Ben Hopper is going to show up and do a story on the other singularity. Now you know my uniform, the button-ups. I always have 4 of them. I would switch them during the day, so it always was somewhat presentable. Use signage to tell the story, not just like wayfinding, but also what your experience is. Use it for branding. Don't spend a lot of money and let people not know who paid for it. This picture was this is pre-Instagram, but it's all over the internet, and our little sign is right there giving the whole point of the thing, and you want to use signage effectively that way. We also use detailed signage like this. This also told the guests everything they needed to know. We use signage like this. Signage like this is not for the guests, it's for the bloggers, and so people can read deeply and get the point. Did they get it with our signage?
I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and if I could implement this very easily into like a wall in our house, I think it would be a very fun way to kind of have it a dynamic, changing artwork that we just all collaborated on as a family.
My mom is actually a high school teacher, and they spend so much money in textbooks for education, and especially in Texas, we're so far behind in education.
I don't know where she gets that idea.
Technology like this would be excellent for
most of us know about how to shoot by the age of 6.
More books and more education to high school students.
So one of the benefits that we have to like having DJs and you know, one person like putting together music is that like that kind of almost Apple-esque like vision and drive for, you know, a particular thing at the event. And when you kind of hand those keys over to everybody, you wind up with something that's like generally good, but it doesn't have as much personality to it.
Maybe I'm giving up some control, but at the same time, it's, you know, that's the great part about it. You know, it's, you know, let me give it to something else so that it's not something I have to deal with. Make something peaceful for me. It's right there.
I think technology, as it becomes more ubiquitous, becomes more pointless. Like, it's doing things that people are already plenty capable of doing, but we're just trying to find lazier and lazier ways to go about making things happen that we can already do just fine on our own. I don't know. I don't really like it, personally.
But these are the 5,000 first impressions, right? These are really like good thoughts, and they came about them on their own. That's when you know you've really successed. And that was, if you read the description for this talk, and in there I promised to tell you the exact distance between a fence and a tent to keep like creative directors from peeing back there. It's 33 inches. I'll tell you why later. Thank you.